All right. I think we're going to kick off everyone just because, as you all can imagine, we're very busy in the lead up to mainnet launch, but we obviously wanted to make sure that, we're providing you guys all the updates we need to make the transition. So, hey everyone, and welcome to this week's LAMINA1 AMA, where we update the community about what we're working on and answer questions about key updates and initiatives as we build the open metaverse together. The topic this week, as you might see from the event invite, is mainnet validation and staking. This is basically following the release of a mainnet and node validation plan last week. If you're listening in and you didn't check out that update, I just posted it in the chat. This blog post basically overviews a three-phase plan we currently have scoped out for validation and node writing on LAMINA1, and it was co-written by yours truly, as well as LAMINA1 CTO Will Carter. On that note, as you guys can see, joining me this week is Will himself, who we haven't seen on in a couple of weeks. Will, how you doing? How's it going in the lead up to mainnet?
Pretty good, pretty good. Good to see you all again. Just heads up, I'm a little sick. I just went to my sister's wedding, so if I'm a little slow today, you'll have to forgive me. But things are going well in the lead up to mainnet. Obviously, we're all really busy. Our engineering team has just made a heroic effort, and the rest of the team really getting everything ready for you guys, implementing new features, and trying to get some content lined up for launch. So yeah. Everything's going well, though. We're excited.
Awesome. Yeah. So you ready to dive into some questions about validation and node writing? So we actually didn't have like too many questions in this week, so we might keep this one relatively short and sweet compared to other sessions. That said, we do have space for community questions here. So if while we're talking, you guys have any follow-ups or want to dive deeper in any of the topics, feel free to drop it into the chat. My first question, though, Will, basically for anyone who's just kind of like joining now and maybe hasn't read the update, do you want to give us a quick overview of the three-phase plan that we released that week? Like, what are the kind of like stages that we're working towards? And I think, a big question we have gotten is like, why start out, with such a small federated system from the beginning?
Yeah, I'll start with the second question first, which is a really good question and sort of important to this space in general when we talk about decentralization. Yeah, so we're starting with actually a really small network compared to a lot of blockchains out there, more mature blockchains, I should say. There are a couple of reasons for that. The first one I'll say is sort of, and this will go into the different phases later on. It's some of it's a bit of a restriction on Avalanche, as some of you who are currently validating may know. There's a pretty high barrier to entry to operate a AVAX validator. That barrier is basically a financial one. You have to stake 2,000 AVAX to become an AVAX validator. So that's one reason. There's just a really high barrier to onboarding a lot of validators into the system early on. But also, even if that barrier didn't exist, we'd probably at least start out with a very small network. And that's generally because you want these things to start off relatively centralized and controlled, and then you just gradually release control of the network out into the community. And that there's a bunch of different reasons for that. Some of it's to make sure that we've caught any major bugs before it gets out into the community. Once the network is essentially operated by community nodes, it becomes much harder to back out and update the core network code in an organized manner to fix those bugs. So it's really easy, especially early on, to patch bugs if we're the ones operating all of the validators. Because we can just go ahead and push them all. But if we have to organize an entire validator community around it, then it becomes, a much more complex process, which we'll do eventually, but especially early on when the risk of any type of bug showing up is, at least relatively high. So that's one reason. The other reason is generally you like to see a significant economic lockup to secure a proof of stake network. And so early on, until a lot of people have locked the token into the network, which is basically a sort of disincentive to misbehave. Until you have a significant amount of economic value staked into the network, it's actually not a good idea to release it out into the public in a permissionless manner, because someone can go on the exchange, buy enough tokens, or if they receive enough tokens in an airdrop, or if maybe an early investor who already has a lot of tokens, it's a lot easier for them to gain a significant percentage of the staked value of the network, and again, create problems, create forks in the network, cause issues like that. So generally with the proof of stake network, or with our proof of stake network, what we'll do is we'll start small. We'll start with the minimum recommended validators for robustness and the Avalanche ecosystem, which is 8. As the network kind of matures and we feel like all of the major bugs have been caught, all the audits are finished, then we'll look at extending outside of just internally validated nodes and start introducing a couple of partner nodes and some of the community nodes from the beta net. And that's what we call phase 2, which is, now that we sort of feel like the network's fairly mature, any economic value in the token is relatively stable, then we'll start introducing some external nodes into the network. We do want to keep that at a relatively limited number, at least initially. And again, 2 reasons for that. One, so that we can sort of release stuff in a controlled manner. We can make sure that validator community is relatively small, they're experienced, they're communicative. So again, if there's any issues, we can patch them quickly. And the second reason, again, is that it's a really high barrier to entry for you guys currently in the AVAX ecosystem. You still need that 2000 AVAX. So that's phase 2. And phase 3 is actually sort of it's a combination of 2 phases. And we're not sure which phase will happen before the other. But, oh, hold on. I saw there's Discord's buggy. Are we good? I haven't been.
Yeah, it's fine. Just okay. We're going to be recording this section so we can post it up later. Yeah.
Okay, cool. Just want to make sure. Yeah, so phase 3, again, it's actually 2 different phases or 2 kind of triggers. And we're not sure which one's going to happen first because one of them, well, actually both of them are sort of out of our control. And one of those is basically once the network hits a significant amount of economic value locked in it, then we can sort of explore the transition from what is essentially a permissioned federated network into a permissionless, what Avalanche calls elastic network. And that's what allows you to basically remove our sort of permissioned approach to inviting you into the network. As long as you meet certain economic criteria, you don't need our permission to jump into the network and start validating. So that'll look very similar to what you guys were doing in BetaNet, but for now, that'll mean you have to have the 2000 AVAX as well as some type of LAMINA1 requirements that we'll define at that time. So that might mean holding a certain or staking a certain amount of L1 into the network in order to become a validator, which it's fairly likely we'll do something like that. There'll probably also be some uptime and performance requirements that we'll implement, and we have some interesting ways we're working on with the foundation to prove those in the network. But that's essentially one of the phases in phase 3, which is to move from a federated permission network into a so-called elastic network. So removing the hard-coded permission from us in order to become a validator. It just becomes completely economically permissioned. The other phase within phase 3, which could happen before or after the one I just described, is Avalanche's transition to subnet-only validators and sort of changing the way that those validators are managed. And That's a really important one. It's sort of the one we're most excited for because what that does is it allows us to remove that 2000 AVAX requirement in order to become a validator. And so there will still be some AVAX requirement to become a validator. I believe they're calling it like validator rent or something similar, where you'll pay like a nominal fee to become a validator in the AVAX ecosystem. But that'll be like much smaller than the current 2000 AVAX, but then you'll be able to become a quote unquote subnet only validator, in which you can just validate the subnets you're concerned with rather than becoming like, an AVAX mainnet validator and then nominating subnets on top of that. So that's the one that like I said, we're most excited about. If that comes before the Elastic subnet, we hope it comes before the Elastic subnet, because I think that'll make the transition into being sort of economically permissioned kind of much more decentralized, much more approachable to our community. So that's kind of high level what those phases look like at the moment.
Awesome. Yeah, and if anyone wants to check out the kind of proposal that that Avalanche has kind of put out, it was ACP 13 that we've been watching since like November, but they actually came out with like a new version of it on April 25th. So right when I was in the middle of writing this update, they released a new version. But yeah, if anyone wants to check out that proposal, if anyone's a member of the Avalanche community and wants to throw a vote in for it on our behalf, definitely let us know. So yeah, I just dropped that in. Ed actually asked an interesting follow-up question that I don't know how to answer, but from a technical perspective, what keeps people from just like becoming a validator and joining the subnet on their own?
Really good question. So in phase 1 and 2, we actually have a key for the subnet, which manages who's allowed to become a validator. And so we actually submit a transaction that approves certain validators as validators of our subnet. So it'll actually be two-sided. So you guys have to, as a AVAX validator, you guys have to choose to validate our subnet, and then we have to actually permit you to validate it on our end as well.
I see. Okay. You also, like you've mentioned, in this kind of phase rollout plan, the mission to kind of transition to this elastic subnet over the next year or so. So I know you gave like a little bit of an overview, but can you talk a little bit more deeply over like what the benefits are from us for having an elastic subnet and like kind of just like how they work? Like what does it mean and what does it mean for us at LAMINA1 to make that big transition?
To an elastic subnet?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. So again, this is kind of central to the notion of central to the notion of decentralization. It's basically when we become quote unquote decentralized, in that we don't have an explicit permission step for you to become a validator in the network, as long as you meet the economic criteria, which could in some ways be considered a permission step if the economy is not open for whatever reason, but ours should be. So as long as you meet the economic requirements, then you can join and operate the network. And again, this is really important to the notion of decentralization, to the notion that people sort of trust the infrastructure and that they could operate it themselves. So it's all going back to sort of the core principles of blockchain, which is decentralized control, no single party, including us, the team, or the foundation, control all the infrastructure, that you as a community member have the opportunity to contribute and operate that infrastructure yourself. That's all still very important to us as an organization. And so that's what elastic subnets will sort of enable us to achieve. Though, again, without the changes within Avalanche, there is still a pretty large economic barrier to joining the network. So both of those combined are sort of critical for actually reaching our end vision.
Yeah. Dell 6173 is in the chat, and they say they're interested in phase two because they're already validating on Avalanche. So they kind of want you to go a little bit deeper into like that process. Like if you're currently a validator for BetaNet, also validating for Avalanche, like what can they expect? Do we like need to approve that Avalanche node still? Is there going to be a permission form? Like what's the plan for our already Avalanche LAMINA1 validators who are just ready, don't care about that 2000 AVAX cost?
Yeah, so we're very excited to bring you on. If you already have the 2000 AVAX or you plan to become an AVAX validator anyway, then yeah, we're certainly interested to hear from you. And I think we'll probably do one last survey prior to enabling phase two to get a sense for how many of you are AVAX validators or planning to become one. And if you are, we'll be doing a couple things. We'll look at sort of whether or not you participated in the BetaNet validation program. Sort of, we'll take a look at your geographic location. We'll probably have some uptime requirements that I mentioned earlier that we're going to be implementing into the core protocol, and that'll be less about permissioning you as or sort of locking you in or enabling your node. So it's not like if you don't meet the uptime requirement, we'll kick you out right away, but you may not get L1 incentives if you don't meet a specific uptime.
Mm-hmm.
We will obviously consider removing validators if they're completely offline in phase two, but I think we're going to stick with something that's more sort of economic incentive based, which is like, okay, you're not participating, not great. You just won't get as many rewards or any if you're not participating at all. And if there are people that, it looks like their validator has no uptime or very low uptime, we might go ahead and remove them in that phase. But yeah, in general, like we're going to try to keep it relatively small. If things go well, we might open it up to even more. But again, as long as you meet that 2000 AVAX, we keep a relatively geographically distributed validator set, and you have some experience within our beta net, then we'll probably make a pretty big effort to include all of you.
Awesome. Actually, kind of on that note, if you are an existing BetaNet validator right now, I'm actually going to be sending out one of our first kind of like interest forms right after this AMA. I'm going to post it to the Telegram channel and our top testers channel that basically just asks like, it helps gauge what your willingness is, whether or not you're already validating for Avalanche, a bunch of that stuff. So definitely keep an eye out for that later today. Ed Keys, another one, asked, I don't see any explicit mention of RPC nodes. So is there any plan to augment the validators with additional servers that kind of only act as public RPC endpoints, for example? Anything like that?
Great question. So there's currently no envisioned requirement for validators to operate public RPC endpoints. We will be providing a handful of public RPC endpoints, and we're working with Avalanche on that as well. They have some interesting infrastructure that allows you to scale up and down RPC endpoints based on demand. So we'll probably be working with them to try those out, see how that goes. Obviously, if you're a validator and you want to run a public RPC endpoint, or even if you're not a validator, anyone can operate an RPC endpoint. So that's totally open for anyone to do. It's actually encouraged if you're doing local development or public development to have your own dedicated RPC endpoint, just for scalability and so that you actually trust the data. But yeah, there isn't sort of a plan at the moment to incentivize public RPC endpoints. If that's something that's sort of interest, we could maybe think about it, but it's hard to do something like that because you need to be able to prove that you are kind of active, that you're serving correct information to clients, and that can become a fairly complex protocol that's easy to game. So yeah, it's not really sort of envisioned that we would incentivize these endpoints, but anyone's free to operate them. And we don't plan on requiring any of our validators to run a public endpoint either.
Mm-hmm. Got a follow-up question from Dell6173, who's like, listen, I'm not a current validator for BetaNet, but I am running an Avalanche node. Any opportunities for folks like that within the Lamina1 community? Are we going to be keeping phase 2 flows to just previous folks that have BetaNet validation experience? Like, when can Avalanche validators kind of expect to potentially be able to onboard to this system, if at all?
Good question. I think what might end up happening if you were not active in the BetaNet network would be that maybe we would have like a phase 2.5. So we would sort of prioritize anyone who did in the beginning of phase 2. So those first 8 to 16 community validators that we bring into the network, we would, try to keep that to BetaNet validators only. And then if and when that goes well, we could look at doing a second push of permission validators. And we might open that up to the larger AVAX community. And yeah, we'll think a little bit about what requirements we're going to put in place for that, or how we sort of invite and choose which validators we'll bring in. But yeah, I don't see any reason why we couldn't invite some new validators into the network if they're already AVAX.
Cool. Yeah, I can update our plan for a potential 2.5. Thanks so much for asking, Dell6173. It's good to know that we've got some interested folks on that end of the equation as well. So another thing that I wanted to talk just a little bit about, that I wanted to clarify through a question and stuff, is talking about kind of the future of delegation on Lamina1. So obviously we had like a whole system for delegation on the Lamina1 BetaNet that sounds like, with the new kind of governance and staking plans that the Open Metaverse Foundation announced a couple of weeks back, that it's probably not going to work the same way that it did in BetaNet. So my question for you is, like, for people who are currently like delegating on BetaNet, is it at all worthwhile for them to continue delegating to like BetaNet validator nodes run by the community? Or is that just sort of something that like isn't super necessary now that we're kind of moving on? That's full disclosure, that's a question from my own, me trying to get through the L1 users and developers style.
It's a really good question. There is no, so start with future of delegation. Outside of the governance system that Peter and the foundation presented, there will be a form of delegation, I think, maybe, in the future. And that would be when we transition to elastic subnets, which again allows people to join the network without our permission, so long as they meet economic requirements. I believe we could facilitate some type of delegation in that system. I have to double check on that. But as far as whether or not you need to continue doing it on BetaNet, I'd say no, unless you really enjoy doing it for whatever reason and you're trying to make some extra BetaNet tokens, again, for whatever reason. There's, I don't think there's a good technical reason for you to continue doing it, unless you just want to keep supporting the BetaNet as a community member, because I think at some point we want to sort of hand over the reins of BetaNet to the community to operate, and we'll talk, I think, probably a little bit more about that later in the AMA. So I didn't read this question before, so I'm actually sort of brainstorming out loud here, but no technical reason why you need to. If you want to be sort of a part of that process of continuing to operate the network as a community, then yeah, maybe it is a good thing to do, especially if you're trying to earn enough BetaNet tokens to become a validator. Staking and earning rewards based on them might be a good way to do that. But it's not it's probably not going to look like that in the mainnet for some period of time. So I wouldn't do it as sort of practice for mainnet.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, on that note, I definitely wanted to jump into one of my questions, which is like we said in the update for like phase one, likely devising a handful of beta net validators to help us continue supporting LAMINA1 beta net by potentially, creating a special rewards destination for them in the governance reward contract. So yeah, I mean, if you want to dive deep into that sort of like plan for beta net, so it sounds like confirmed BetaNet's going to stay up and running after mainnet launch. Two, we're going to be handing it kind of over to the community to kind of run as that test environment. But I definitely would like for you to go into, how that might work, why folks would want to keep the BetaNet up and running, like what sorts of things they'd want to test on it. Yeah.
Yeah, so I think the foundation aims to keep the BetaNet up and running as, again, another kind of test environment, some place where we can play around with, all of the node code that we had been developing for the past year, to keep it as sort of a place where you can launch your project to a sort of limited beta community and test it out with real people. So it's supposed to be, again, another development environment, an alternative to using Fuji Test Network. That's primarily the biggest reason why you might want to use it. We are probably going to incentivize the operation of BetaNet, or at least we've talked about it with the foundation. And basically what that would look like is a new recipient in the rewards contract that Peter introduced a week or two ago, I guess both weeks. And that would essentially just forward some mainnet tokens to everyone who's currently operating a BetaNet validator. We haven't worked through exactly what that smart contract looks like, but I would imagine that it would mean someone from the foundation operating a bot, which reads the current validator set on the BetaNet P chain and updates the smart contract on the mainnet on a daily basis, so that when tokens get distributed via the rewards contract, some of them will go to some of the validators that are currently on BetaNet. We still need to work out exactly what that looks like and exactly how much they would receive and all that fun stuff, but that's currently an envisioned kind of goal.
Awesome. Easy123 asked, any news on the nodes that are, ending their validation or staking period sometime soon? Are we going to be restaking them, continuing with data?
Yeah, we'll get you back up and running.
Undercott asked, since so many people have to wait to participate in validation, will it be possible to stake RL1 token, or can you just stake unlocked L1? I feel like this is an important clarification.
Your mic is bugging out.
God. Again, sorry guys. Let me check out this. I'm just gonna take my headphones off. All right, is this better?
Try again.
Testing 1, 2, 3. Voice still
a little. Yeah, it's still lagging a little bit.
That's my Wi-Fi. Then there's not much I can do about it, unfortunately.
Yeah, sounds like it. It's sounding okay right now. It's definitely better.
Okay. Question. Since so many people have to wait to participate in validation, is it possible to stake RL1 or LL1 tokens, or is it just unlocked L1 that you'll be able to stake?
It's a good question. At the moment, we only plan on allowing unlocked L1 to stake. I think the reason for that is, the entire premise of staking is for you to give up something in exchange for voting power, which is like a way for you to sort of, express your commitment to the well-being of the network. And RL1 is already locked up, so it's not much of a commitment to lock up a token that's already locked up in exchange for voting power. Um, it is something I've seen done in a lot of networks. We did it at the XX network, my previous project. But I think for now, we are limiting it just to unlocked L1. So it's a good idea and a great question. But yeah, right now, just unlocked L1.
Got it. Ed's got a question about the governance contract. We might end up having to field this one, Ed, to the Open Metaverse Foundation at our airdrop AMA later this week, but he's definitely taken a look at the governance contract and is asking, how should we be thinking about the node operator rewards? So, right now we've got 15% of the whole issuance flow. But at mainnet launch, it sounds like a lot of that, since we're starting with such a small mainnet validation cohort, that a lot of those tokens are just kind of going to be going back into the system. Do you have any insights on that, or do you want to save that for our AMA on Friday? Sorry to put you on the spot with this one, but Ed has asked me it like 3 times this week.
I think it's a really good point. I don't have any kind of control over those allocations. That would be something the foundation would have to adjust. I think you're right though. That given that the initial node set is going to be primarily internal, that it doesn't make sense for it to be quite as high as it is. So we'll talk about it internally. I'll reach out to Peter. Maybe there's a reason why it's set the way it is. But it's a great question, and we'll try to get you an answer before the AMA on Friday.
Yeah, I pinged it to him on Signal last week, just being like, Peter, FYI. So yeah, we'll definitely keep you posted. Um, And then for the last question, unless anyone's got anything else that they want to ask, drop it in the chat. But Tim Guru, I think you might have jumped on a little bit late, but he's asking, so we Lamina1, are we dependent on Avalanche? Like we don't belong to ourselves. So like, they're asking like, how can this be avoided? Like how can we kind of branch out and be more autonomous? Obviously kind of like phases 1 and 2 in particular make us seem like we're pretty dependent on their infrastructure still.
Yeah, it's a really good point. It's something we took really seriously when we decided to partner with Avalanche, and it is a sort of trade-off that we made. Um, that early on in the network, we will basically be pretty reliant on Avalanche, their economy, and to an extent, the P-chain infrastructure to maintain the security of our network. That again starts to change a little bit once you move towards subnet only validators and the changes that they're making around those. But we thought the trade-off was one worth making so that we could get access to the wider AVAX ecosystem, especially early on in the network, where sort of being as reliant as we currently are on event, use the Avalanche main chains, maybe isn't as big of a deal as it'll be like a year or two down the road. So it was a trade-off we made early on. We'll be a little bit more reliant on it, but in exchange we get access to the AVAX ecosystem, the marketplaces, the other projects, the exchanges, and all of the users in AVAX as well.
Great. Well, that's the end of our questions from the community. Again, I'm going to pop the sort of latest update. Oh, wait, Ed snuck one in real quick. One last question from Ed. Token flow. My understanding is that gas fees ordinarily get burned, but new tokens get minted through validator staking to balance it out. Does the L1 subnet work in the same way? And does replacing staking cause a problem with gas fees potentially, quote unquote, leaking out of the system over time? Ed's been waiting for this, you can tell.
All right, let me read this one more time.
Yeah, it's in the latest one.
Gas fees only get burned, new tokens get minted. So I think I understand what you're asking. I don't. It's not going to be a problem initially. We actually are having a conversation about something, basically this problem right now, actually internally, which is what do we do with gas fees? Are we burning them? Are we moving them into the rewards contract? Are we giving them to validators? We've talked a little bit internally about doing all of the above. Right now, we're probably just going to burn them, but that's not final. That's something we're still working out. Um, but no, replacing staking, I don't see why it would cause a problem with gas fees leaking out of the system over time. That's sort of something some networks consider desirable. It's called sort of deflationary networks. Um, which means the token supply is, yeah, it's slowly going to shrink over time because some of the gas fees are being burned. There's a max supply on the rewards, and so over time, the maximum supply of the network will go down. Um, for us, if we burn them, that will be the case. If we decide to reinvest them in the rewards contract, give them to validators, um, or do anything else with them other than burn them, then it will just maintain a stable 1 billion max total supply of tokens. So either scenario is possible. I don't know which one the foundation will decide to go with in the end, but yeah, if they are burned, it's some people might consider that a positive thing because it's deflationary over time rather than inflationary or flat.
Cool. All right. Well, that is finally the last question. Again, I'm going to post the Medium update for folks who haven't been able to kind of read through the phase plan for node running and validation. Definitely check that out. There is no secret code for this AMA. As we announced last week, BetaNet questing is over. It's going to relaunch post mainnet launch. We're just tallying up the community rewards now. Later this week, join us for an AMA on our upcoming mainnet airdrop, featuring both the LAMINA1 core team and the Open Metaverse Foundation. So we're basically going to be covering the plan for rollout. We're going to give you a preview of the new flow for claiming and withdrawing tokens. It's going to work a little bit differently than just Discord bot. We've got we're actually moving some of the functionality over to the LAMINA1 hub, which will make it, I think, a lot better and easier and great for all of us. And we'll also give you a little bit of a preview on, how we'll be tallying up allocations and, of course, what's next for community incentives and rewards post-launch. Also, as a heads up for everyone listening in, since you guys are our core insiders, this AMA is basically likely going to be the last one we do before mainnet launch. We're getting close. So please be sure to make it if you have any last minute questions for either the Open Metaverse Foundation or the core team. And feel free to drop any questions you have for that AMA into our dedicated AMA questions channel. As always, guys, I'll keep you guys all posted on what's coming up next. I'll continue to be feeding, all bug reports, feedback, questions, and stuff to the team as we're getting ready for mainnet launch. I mean, yeah, we're weeks away, putting the finishing touches on a ton of things, and really excited to get it out. No sleep till mainnet. Definitely see you guys in the channels and back on this stage a little bit later this week. But thanks so much for joining. If you want to input the secret code that Ed posted, I guess just send it to him, and he can do something with it, I suppose. All right, guys. Thanks so much for joining us. See you guys a little bit later this week. And thanks, Will, for coming on.
Of course, good to see you all.
Bye, guys.